Want to see how I drafted these two patterns together to make this cute novelty print vintage dress? Then watch this video. Hey everyone, welcome back to Tasha Could Make That. I've got a fun sewing project that I'm going to work on today, making a dress by mashing up a 1950s blouse pattern with cut-on sleeves and the Christine Haynes Emery dress pattern. I've made, I think, 5 versions of this pattern mashup before. This is actually one of them I made in a vintage cotton print. This one has a slightly lower neckline than the one I'm going to make today, but it's a combo that I adore, and I can't wait to make another one. I'm also going to show you roughly how I drafted together this bodice in case you want to make one too, so follow along as I sew this dress. First up, here is the fabric that I'm going to use. It is a cotton sateen print from Spoonflower. The designer is Charlotte of Tuppence Halfpenny. I'll link her fabric designs on Spoonflower in the description. This is a super cute winter themed print, but it avoids being Christmassy, I think, so I can actually wear it past December, which is great. I only have 3 yards of it, so I'm not sure what I'm gonna do for a skirt yet. Usually I'll figure that out kind of as I go in fabrics that, you know, I don't have enough of, or particularly for vintage fabrics. I use a lot of vintage fabrics and I don't always have very good yardage for them. So I'll kind of plot out the layout of the bodice and then I'll decide what skirt pieces can I actually fit afterwards. And yes, this is a cotton and I do live in Chicago and this is a winter dress. Those things don't necessarily sound like they line up, but I actually wear a lot of cotton prints in winter anyway, just with more layers than I would normally wear in summer. And with the addition of the sleeves, I can tell myself it's a winter dress. I'm not saying that that's realistic logic, but it's my logic. Here are the 2 patterns that I'm going to be using for this. The bodice is mainly going to be the Christine Haynes Emery dress bodice without the sleeves. It's just an excellent modern bodice. It has a really great vintage fit on its own, and it's perfect for this hack. So I've actually hacked this bodice endlessly in other ways, and I just love it. There are actually 3/4 length sleeves in the pattern, but it's for wovens, and I just personally don't like wearing woven set-in sleeves particularly. I prefer the more kind of 50s style of the cut-on sleeve like this, whether it's a cap length sleeve or any length in between. Then the second pattern is this 50s blouse pattern, and looking at it you might be like, how does this all come together? But actually I'm only lifting the sleeves from the blouse pattern, so if you want to do this too, all you have to do is find a vintage or reproduction or modern blouse or dress pattern that has cut-on sleeves, in at least if it's going to be similar to mine, that have, you know, a full length or 3/4 length or elbow length or whatever, and then you can make this work. So I just happened to go with this one. It was a blouse pattern that I was already familiar with. I've made this a few times actually, both of the views. The view that I like the best has the cute little wing collar. I love that, and the button down. The 3/4 length sleeves with 3 elbow darts, that's the sleeve that I hacked into this sleeve, and I just redrafted them to be elbow length. That being said, I did originally draft this dress with the longer sleeve, but I really wanted my final dress to fit on this very specific 44-inch wide fabric, and so I kept cutting the sleeves back until I had the front bodice piece exactly 44 inches wide, and that is the sleeve length right here. Okay, this was funny because when I made the second one, it was a while since I'd made the original one, and in the end I was like, why the hell are these sleeves so long? Because they were the original 3/4 length sleeve and not the elbow length sleeve. And what I had done is I'd used the original pattern pieces, but usually I'll write something like do not use on them, but I probably figured maybe I would want to use them at some point in time, but that was not the time, and I didn't understand why I had a dress with the sleeves that I wasn't expecting, which, like, you would think I would have figured that out as I was sewing them and thinking, why am I sewing 3 elbow darts in a sleeve that hits above my elbow? But, you know, I didn't figure that out as I was doing it, so it was pretty funny. Anyway, let's dive into how I Frankenstein these patterns together and how you could do something similar if you'd like to as well, and then I'll sew this dress with you. So here are the 2 patterns that I'm going to be merging together. This is the vintage Butterick blouse pattern, and I'm just going to be taking the sleeve from this one and the Emery dress pattern, and I'm just going to be taking the bodice from this one. So these are the Emery dress front and back bodice pieces. They're different versions, which doesn't matter since I'm just showing you roughly how I do this, but I've made some fitting adjustments over time to the front bodice in particular. So the bust darts are lowered, and I think I maybe changed the neckline ever so slightly. But these are the dress pattern bodice pieces that we're going to be using. And then here are the vintage blouse pieces that we'll be using. And so you can see the cut-on sleeve right here. It's on the back piece, you can actually see that this is a darted sleeve. So there's 3 elbow darts. I'll be going for elbow length, so cutting off about at the middle dart because I know that this hits actually at my elbow. So there's 1 above and 1 below. And even though this pattern has a collar, it doesn't really matter because all of what we're going to be doing is on the sleeve side. So you could use one with a collar or scoop neck. It doesn't really matter what the neckline is of this. So don't worry too much about the fact that this has nothing to do with the neckline of the actual dress that I'm going to be making. So I start with the back just because it's a simpler pattern piece. So I've got the back bodice pieces for both the dress and the vintage blouse. And what I do here is basically I take the inner corner of the shoulder seam of the dress bodice and the neckline, and then I match it up with the shoulder, or you could call this the over sleeve seam since it's a cut-on sleeve of the vintage blouse. And then I also match things up at the underarm. Now both of these patterns have a 5/8 inch seam allowance, so I can actually match up things to the raw edge. Obviously, if the seam allowances didn't match, I would line up specifically the seam allowances, but I can be a little bit, kind of casual about it since I know it's the same. So basically, this is what I do. I line this up. I mark the seam allowances first because I think that's easier. And then I line this notch up with the shoulder, and then I start just kind of walking this over until the raw edges meet. And again, the more precise way is to do it along the seam allowance, which matches up the way I'm doing it. But if this was like a 1/2 inch on the vintage blouse, it would matter. So I have my piece positioned here and here. I'm gonna weight this down so I can show you. I'll also line up the grain line here. Now, this is a complete coincidence that these pieces are the same width, but because of that, I wanna show you this with a different vintage blouse bodice because this might look a little bit confusing since they do match up so well. So here's a different one this is also a dress that I've sewn super cute. So this also has cut-on sleeves and frankly kind of a similar neckline to the other dress because obviously, or to the blouse because obviously I like that neckline. But you can see here if I use this pattern piece and move our blouse one out of the way. You can see if I do the same thing for this, that this works on this one as well. So I've got the seam line marked here for the shoulder, and I'm just going to kind of walk this over. Again, this is a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I would have this marked here, if I was actually using this piece. But you can see that this is not the same size. And so this is roughly how I would do this if I was using this pattern piece. I wouldn't expect these to be the same size, and they're very different on the front, particularly since it has buttons down the front on the blouse. But I keep the grain line the same, and then when these meet, I go from here in terms of how I start tracing this out. So I'll show you this with the blouse. I have both of these overlapped now the way I was talking about. So matched up here, matched over here, grain line is the same. And you can see here that all basically I'm doing is drafting this sleeve onto this bodice. It really is basically as simple as that. And, this is probably pretty unconventional. I'm not a fashion student or anything like that. So, if my methods make you cringe, then, look away now, but it works for me. So like I said, I would cut off about here. This is the length that I did on my sleeves, but you could absolutely do the full length sleeve. You could do this with a short cap sleeve. Doesn't really matter, whatever your preference is. And so all I do to merge these together is trace the bodice with the sleeve that I'm looking for. And I'll show you what my pattern piece actually looks like in comparison. Now here's my actual mash up back pattern piece. So you can just see it's basically exactly more or less what I said. There are minor differences because, like I said, I've done adjustments over time, and I am a huge proponent of doing muslins. So if you do this pattern hack, by all means, do a muslin first, or at least baste your seams together and test the fit and everything after you stay stitch all your seams and everything. But make sure that you're happy with it, because, for example, over time I decided that it was actually better if I had a bigger neck dart in the back neck, and I think I adjusted something on the front as well. So, you know, this is, like I said, several iterations down the road, so things aren't exact. I believe the other thing that I did that I forgot to mention is that I tapered the underseam in maybe, I would say, like 1/2 inch, 3/8 of an inch or so. And I think I probably actually did the same thing a little bit, maybe 1/4 of an inch on the oversleeve seam. And again, this is just based on muslins and trying it on and seeing how it fit. The sleeve that I went with on the blouse pattern was just a little bit looser fitting than I wanted it to be on the dress. I wanted it to be kind of like a trimmer cut on sleeve. And so over time I, you know, scooched a little bit out of that seam allowance. But this is it. And so if you just look at this on its own, you can kind of see that this is really just a mashup of those two things. And so we've got the Emery bodice, we've got the sleeve of the vintage pattern, and that's it for the back piece. So I do really the same thing as I do for the front here as I did for the back. Make sure the grain line is matched up as I do this. Match up this inner junction of the dress bodice with the shoulder seam. Match up the raw edges if I'm being lazy in the same seam allowance, or the seam line at the underarm. And then I just trace the bodice with the sleeve. And obviously I have to figure out the length of the sleeve here, and so usually at that point I just bring out my back piece, which I've already done, and I cut it accordingly, with or without the sound effect. So here are my mashed up pattern pieces for this. And these are several iterations down the road. Like I said, I've made 5 of these so far, and I think the most recent adjustment that I did was I felt like I was getting a bit of a gaping neckline on the front, and so I did a gaping neckline adjustment. And because there's no defined arm side for these, because they're cut on sleeve obviously, I sent the extra fullness out through the bust dart, and that worked out really well. So if for some reason that happens to you at some point, you could try that out. I also, many iterations back, deepened the back neckline dart for the same reason. I just felt somehow it just needed a little something extra taken out there. And so these I think these are the two pieces that I've used most recently. I usually note the version, and I have 2 versions back and like 3 versions back here, so I may rummage through my pattern pieces again when I do this. So when you see me cutting this out in a minute, and if the pattern pieces are different, that's why. But at the end of the day, I want to show you just with a little drawing all I did here. It's really actually fairly simple. I took a basic set-in sleeve dress bodice and then drafted on cut-on sleeves from another pattern. And if you wanted to, you could easily use a different dress bodice if you've got one that fits you really well, or if you've got a bodice block, you could use that. And even if you didn't have a pattern that had cut-on sleeves, I think you could fairly easily draft this even still. It's, you know, cut-on sleeves are a very forgiving style, I find, and so I don't think it would be too hard to do that. You know, you might want to do a muslin first, or use a fabric that you're not too precious about and baste the seams together, but I don't think it'd be difficult to do with other patterns at all to make your own version. Hey, if you're liking this video, please take a moment to give me a thumbs up on it, and please subscribe to the channel if you don't already. And away we go. Here I am cutting out on my big old cutting table. If you want to know more about the table, I talk about it in my sewing room tour video for my intro videos, so check that out. I'll put a card in the upper right for that. I do usually cut out on a single layer of fabric like this, unless I'm cutting out a solid. For prints, it just helps me line everything up better. I have a better sense of where the print is going to be on the bodice, and it helps me match up prints along the center back seam or anywhere else that I may be trying to match things. I didn't really capture matching up the center back seam print on this fabric very well in this video, But this is something that I get a lot of requests on Instagram for print matching and plaid matching, and so I definitely think I'll have to do a future video on that and show you guys all my kind of tips and tricks for how I make that pretty easy. At least I think it's easy, but maybe it's just because I do it a lot. Next up, I cut out and pressed the fusible interfacing, and I used an organza press cloth for that, dedicated to fusible. I actually have it marked which side is the sticky side so I don't accidentally get it stuck to my iron. And I use professional interfacing from Fashion Sewing Supply. It's really great quality and pretty inexpensive too. I also use fusible stay tape to reinforce the zipper area on the center back of the bodice and the skirt, so I'm adding that here as well. I just kind of eyeball the length based on the length of the zipper, and you know, it usually works out more or less. Then I stay stitch all of the seams that are on a bias. So in this case, it's the neckline seams and both the oversleeve seam and undersleeve seam, like I'm showing here. That just helps prevent them from stretching out when I'm doing all the handling. And then I pin everything that I can. So all the darts and the pocket pieces. I've kind of converted to doing this method because it's a lot faster. I never used to bother doing that, but I have a lot less time to sew than I used to, and so it kind of helps me focus my process by doing as much at a time as I can, and then sitting and sewing as much as I can, pressing as much as I can, and it works out really nicely for me. Time to press all the darts. I use a tailor's ham for that, and then press with my fingers a little bit. Kind of picked up that technique from tailoring, but I do this so that I don't crush the tip of the dart. This might look kind of weird, but I actually press up a crease twice on the sleeve hem just to make it easier to sew later. Then I pin and sew all the skirt seams and all of the bodice seams that I can, and I press them and serge them as well. But for the undersleeve seam, I make sure to reinforce that curve with a line of extra stitches just inside of the seam allowance. And I clip that curved seam too before I finish the seam allowances with my serger. And I press all those seams that I just sewed, and the sleeve seams can be a little bit annoying, but I use a sleeve roll inside and it helps. And because I clip the curve in the undersleeve seam when I press it, it'll lay nice and flat. And while I'm pressing, I press the center back seam allowances on both the bodice pieces and the facing pieces for the neckline in preparation for pinning the neckline facing to the bodice. I use the method that Gertie describes in Gertie's Ultimate Dress Book, and since I learned that method, I have just never looked back. I absolutely love it. I always do lap zippers, mostly because they're more authentic to vintage styles, but I do also just like them better in general. And in this method, you fold back the bodice over the facing and leave a little bit of a gap, and so the zipper slots right into that gap when you sew everything, and it makes a really, really nice and tidy finish. I absolutely love it. Like I said, I've totally converted to this method quite some time ago, and it's my absolute favorite for doing a lap zipper. It takes a little while to get everything all neatly lined up at the shoulder seams and everywhere, but I've done so many of these at this point, I could probably do a center back zipper in my sleep. Time to sew the facing to the bodice and then press it and trim and grade the seam allowances. I normally trim them, grade them, and then notch them. However, this time, for some reason, I notched first, and so I made all of this way more difficult than it needed to be. So don't do that, because I had to cut all those teeny little notches off, and it was really, really annoying. Time to understitch the neckline. I just sew a line of stitching on the facing side with the seam allowances pressed towards the facing. I never skip understitching because it just helps lay everything nicer. And most of my clothes I throw in the washing machine, so it helps them keep their shape better after the laundry as well. But you can see how nicely this all folds in as I'm pressing it here. It's definitely worth that extra bit of time to understitch for sure. And the bodice is starting to look really, really cute. Oh, I'm loving how this is turning out so far. Here's a little peek of the bodice on my dress form before I move on to the next step, which is prepping for the zipper. I alternate between using a line of zigzag stitches with a thread inside, in my case fingering weight yarn because I have a lot of it, or using 2 lines of basting stitches together. I just happen to go with the zigzag method for this one. I actually do the basting stitches more frequently though. The way I do it is I gather it as tightly as I can, and then I pin the center back seam allowances on both sides, and then I adjust the fullness of the gathers to fit, and I just find that that method works really well for me. It takes a while to do all this, but once I feel kind of confident that I have everything the way I want it in terms of the amount of fullness, I actually tie off the threads on both sides, because then I can just adjust all of the gathers as I need to, and I know that I'm not going to accidentally like pull more of the gathers out and then have to regather them. So that's how I do it. It kind of works for me, and it takes a while, but you know, it's worth it. And then it's time to sew the waistband seam. I take my time with this, and I adjust the gathers as I go to make sure that I don't pin them in weird directions. Not that that prevents me from always doing it, because I still do sometimes. And then sometimes I have to seam rip too, like I did this time. All good now though, and moving on to the zipper. With the neckline already prepped, this part's pretty easy. I just sew the right side of the zipper tape to the right side of the dress bodice opening, and I already sewed the skirt up to the end of the zipper tape in preparation for this. So just lots of pinning and then time to sew this. This is where I use the zipper foot for the right side of the zipper only for the way I do this. Moving on to the left side of the zipper, which is the lapped side of the zipper, I put a quilting roller inside because it gives me a flat surface to pin into, and so I don't accidentally catch the front fabric in when I pin. I'm getting really excited about how cute this novelty print is looking. It is just looking awesome, especially with the center back print matching that I did. I did not do that on the skirt because, fastidious as I am, even I have my limits, so I don't bother down there because you can't even see it. And it's a gathered skirt anyway. Not that I would do it even if it wasn't gathered skirt, so what am I pretending here? Just a few more pins left to place, and then it'll be time to top stitch the lap zipper side. I feel like when you sew something frequently, you kind of develop your own methods for what works best for you, and for me, that means that when I sew the lapped side of the zipper and I top stitch it, I use my walking foot. It's a little bit fussy at the beginning, at the end, so I've kind of worked my own methods around that. So I might show that to you sometime if you'd like. Let me know in the comments. Print matching zipper reveal, and it looks awesome, doesn't it? I'm so pleased with that. I even got that little double curve right. Looks great. Then all I have to do to finish the zipper is hand sew the facings to the tape. That's it. Last up is hemming, and for gathered skirts, I usually do a 2-inch hem turn up with an additional 1/4 inch turn in, and then I sew it by hand with a simple slip stitch. And I gotta say, I really hate hemming. I need to remember to do more circle skirts and 3/4 circle skirts so that I can just do a narrow machine hem. I always forget that when I do gathered skirts. In fact, here I'm saying I hate hemming as I'm hemming. Some people get joy out of it, but I am not those people. But I'm almost done, so I'll show you this shortly. Okay, I just thought I'd say that sometimes I sew a pattern that I've made before and I don't try it on until the very end, and it has been known to bite me in the butt, but not this time. Nope, this is real cute. I'm very happy with this. I didn't show you how I made this matching belt for my dress because I forgot. But if you'd like to know how I make matching belts for my vintage dresses, let me know in the comments and I'll do a tutorial on it. I hope you had fun watching me make this dress. Thanks, it has pockets. If you use any of the tips that I gave in the beginning for drafting a similar bodice for yourself someday, please be sure to tag me. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.